Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here with us today. I'm Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited for today's program with Jack Dempsey, Board of Directors member for the ALN and also Managing Partner at Asset Management Partnerships. More from Jack in a moment, but before we get underway, we just want to thank our ALN Platinum organizational member, Onuma System. We just had a great program, BIM Storm, yesterday with Kimono Numa and much of the Onuma System team, and there will be a video coming out available with more about that soon. We just want to thank our patron members as well and other organizational members, especially Asset Management Partnership. And if you're out there and thinking maybe you would like your organization to work with the ALN, please reach out. We'd love to talk about how we can collaborate. And with that, we'll bring on Mike Bordenero, Executive Director for the ALN, and also say that if you're out there watching, please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, where you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. Mike, welcome.
Great, thank you, Nick. Yesterday you had a background picture with no snow. Did it snow? Is your background picture reflecting?
Fortunately not. It is a windy day, but not a cold one.
We've got a summer day here in Chicago. And before we get to Jack Dempsey in Virginia Beach, Virginia, I want to emphasize that the program yesterday was really good. And the entire series involved members of the ALN. That was a really nice, unique aspect of it. University Health was involved. Jack Dempsey Asset Management Partnership was involved. CDV Systems was involved. A number of others. So that was neat. Thanks for punching that, Nick. And looking forward, next week we have a very special ALN Thursday at 3. The Briggs Blair consulting company helps people address sexual harassment and sexual abuse in the workplace. And we've never touched on intangible asset management as appropriate, as directly as this. And they'll have statistics on the costs that are diverted from your mission. If you have sexual harassment, they'll talk about the punishment to your brand and your reputation. And if you have women in your organization, you have sexual harassment issues, whether your leaders know it or not. And we're very proud to be bringing that next week. Then the following week, the 27th, we're introducing our ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. And we're going to be talking about how this board of people, this collection of people, are going to try to help advance asset management in municipalities and cities, towns, townships throughout the country and around the world. And we have a program lined up April 23rd or May 23rd, and it'll be promoting that. So really, thanks to our organizational members, we're just having a wealth of content. So let's get to the wealth of content that Jack Dempsey offers. So it's not possible to talk about everything that Jack Dempsey knows about. His new newsletter has just blown me away with the rich content that he's providing in simple, clear manners about asset management in ways that people can immediately start impacting their organization with a structured approach to asset management. He was instrumental in the National Academy's report, strategies, which Nick put the newsletter in. If you want to put the strategies link, it is a PDF report that you can download for free, but you can order the hard copy also. And we'll be talking about that and some of the many other things that Jack Dempsey is involved with. Jack, welcome back to ALN Thursday at 3.
Glad to be here, and kudos too for Asset Leadership Network for putting this on and organizing these types of events. I mean, it's a really rich content, and I've become a big fan, not only just a participant, but also a big fan of watching the information that you get to share every episode.
I thank you very much. We are fortunate to have a lot of very intelligent and compassionate people who are willing to share their knowledge, experience, and time with us. So we're fortunate in that regard. So why don't we start off with the big guns, the National Academy's strategies report.
So yeah, I mean, big guns is probably a way to describe it. I mean, just some context. The strategies to renew federal facilities is a report that has just been published by the National Academies. And to put it into context, the National Academies is a quasi-government organization. It was first chartered by Abraham Lincoln, so it has a long history, and its role is to advise the legislative and executive branches of government. It evolved over the years to include the academies of science, the academies of engineering, the academies of medicine, and now it's just collectively called the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. What's I think kind of unique about the National Academies is it's a place where it's not influenced by money, and it's non-political, which means when the National Academies commissions a report, it's often directed or requested from directly from the executive branch or from the legislative branch. The National Academies will impanel a committee of experts, like a blue ribbon panel. They'll have a problem statement, some objectives, maybe some timeframes of what they need to achieve, and then they're entirely independent, figure out how to respond to the questions or the issues, and develop a report. And that report is seen by the public or any of the commissioners who kind of start the report, ask for the report when it's published. So there's no real opportunity to influence its outcome. It's just it's meant to be a pure view from a group of experts. There's a series of reviews that happen on each report. There's legal reviews, peer reviews, other content reviews to make sure that the report is a solid, statement of content that could be used by consumers.
How does this report fit in, or what was the mission of this report? And then we'll get to how it fits into other reports.
Sure. So this report was initiated by the Federal Facilities Council, which is another body within the National Academies. It's a consortium of federal agencies. You have to be a federal agency to join the Federal Facilities Council, and it's kind of it's a coffee clutch. It's a bunch of facility managers, planners, architects who have specific interests in terms of how to manage federal facilities. They pool together the resources, and they too can be a generator of the report. So they were the commissioning agent for this report. The basic problem statement that they were looking to solve was how to improve the business case for investments in federal facilities. Most agencies are challenged with the deferred maintenance backlog, multiple different funding streams, difficulty in trying to connect the dots on making good investments. The pound an ounce is worth an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of relief type of storyline, and they were just looking for guidance on how to do a better business case, really, and that was really kind of the impetus that got strategies rolling.
Okay. So before we get into how this fits into a series of reports, what are some of the big findings?
So there's 5 recommendations, and we'll hit on those early. But the basic observation that comes out of the report is there's a systematic failure in federal policy. That basically, it adds up to, it makes it exceedingly challenging, if not impossible, for federal agencies to demonstrate competence in their ability to manage the facility assets. Now, that sounds like a real alarming statement. It's a true statement, but you have to kind of understand what it's really saying. Federal policy is originated through laws and statutes. It's distilled into many OMB documents that are very, very good. And they provide guidance on particularly Circular A11, which is the development and execution of the president's budget. It's really kind of how we figure out what to spend money on. That policy focuses on what ends up being a short-term budgetary cycle, next year's budget or a 5-year planning process in terms of budgetary requirements. By doing that, it misses the opportunity, and that's really what it is, the opportunity to understand the requirements of long-lived assets. And then, of course, in this case, we're talking about facility assets that have 20, 30, 50, even 100 years of life in them. And so those short-term investment strategies challenge the ability to say, hey, maybe a little bit more preventive maintenance will extend the life and overall be a net benefit. And that benefit can be reinvestments into operations, into training and stuff like that. So when strategies says that there's been a systematic failure in policy, as a member of the committee, I stand by that statement. It's a true statement. But it's also recognizing that it's not necessarily that the current policy has failed. What it's really saying is to improve outcomes, the federal government should be introducing asset management capabilities into the policy to balance the short-term and long-term investment needs that all agencies have.
Is anything called out in particular related to asset management?
There are a number of them. Of the 5 recommendations, and I'll just kind of hit them really quickly, but you can go to the report and get a detailed look at it.
Yes.
5 recommendations. The first recommendation is all federal agencies should be implementing an asset management system. The system is a disciplined approach of how to make investment decisions, and the underpinning of understanding what that system is ISO 55000. Simply, there's no other standard that exists that defines a management system in terms of investment strategies related to assets better than ISO 55000. So this report recognizes that. It follows on a GAO report from a few years ago that also made the same point, GAO 1957. I think is the name.
Shout out to Amelia.
Amelia Sachoy and many friends over there. I mean, GAO did some real groundbreaking work on doing that. So you have to get a management system in place. The second one is to have what would be called a SAMP, a strategic asset management plan. In the federal government, they call it a real property capital plan. It basically provides the same role. And there's OMB executive orders that detail the implementation of that. So the groundwork is there. The third one, and I'll kind of tie them all together here in a bit. The third one is those strategies, those SAMPs, those real property capital plans, need to be assertive in terms of achieving an objective. It's not just the efficiency of managing resources. It's actually to support the performance of not only that agency, but more broadly, government-wide requirements such as climate change impacts, adapting to post-COVID changes in terms of use of facilities and stuff like that. So there's these broader strategies that need to be resonant in terms of the coordination of these strategies. The fourth recommendation is the improvement of models and measures and metrics to make good decisions. There's a lot of good data there. There's a lot of good information. But the next step is really kind of synthesizing them into predictive models that can be used in decision-making to help bend the curve and kind of push the investment strategy horizon further out past 5 years. The fifth one is I kind of consider it like the so what recommendation is so what after all that stuff, those recommendations there still needs to be changes in how organizations manage facilities, invest in facilities, get budget for facilities. And the recommendation provides a number of different examples of kind of investment strategies, things like working capital funds, investment banks, infrastructure banks, and that kind of stuff. But what it's really saying is to introduce good incentives on how risk-based decision-making is made. So the thread that kind of brings them all together is operational readiness. It's basically, are those facilities responsive, resilient, and supportive of achieving the agency's mission effectively and efficiently? So asset management really kind of comes down to investment strategy and resource decision making. So those 5 recommendations build upon one another to basically introduce or to reinforce best practices that that do need to be better incorporated into policy.
So that sets us up to talk about how this report builds on previous reports.
So it's interesting. So going back to what is the National Academies doing and how do these activities work? The National Academies and I'm also over there on the Board of Infrastructure and Constructed Environment. So it's a senior oversight board that kind of monitors and evaluates the program that's being executed. And this report, among others, was or commissioned under that authority. This report is really a report, is a 6th one in a series of reports that have basically gone over the last 30 years. So about every 4 or 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer, the National Academies has kind of collected best practices, took a survey of capabilities that existed in the industry, and identified areas where maybe a little bit of extra attention or nudge that needs to be moving forward. So among these series, the first one was committing to the cost of ownership back in, I think it was 1990 when it was published. That was the report that first documented the 2 to 4% of PRV, which is a benchmark used across the federal agency and in other places.
PRV?
PRV is present replacement value. So what it's saying is to basically recapitalize or keep facilities operating effectively. Agencies should be budgeting somewhere between 2 to 4% of the total value of those facilities annually to kind of keep it going. And the basic math is a building is going to last somewhere between 50 and 100 years. So when you kind of do the inverse on that, that's 2 to 4% of its value. So that's been an industry benchmark that's still current today, and still a very relevant benchmark in terms of performance. But that one was first published in the first one. There was some other reports that were produced. I think it was stewardship of federal facilities, which is the next one, was the impetus that established the Federal Property Council. That report had a clear recommendation that there needed to be an executive committee to be formed to pull all that together. And then subsequent to that, we saw Executive Order 13327, which is a real property capital management one, which really started putting things together. And subsequently, that's been updated in the Federal Property Reform Act of 2016. So it was the National Academies report that really kind of, I think, provided the focus that was able to get that ball across the finish line. The report preceding this was the one that was predicting outcomes of investments in maintenance repair for federal facilities. And that's really associated with the DoD's implementation of Builder as a mandated facility assessment requirement, a knowledge-based assessment across all of DoD. And this report,
which you were involved in creating Builder, so let's acknowledge.
Well, no, I will not take credit for that. I was a lab rat, so to speak, in my time in grad school, and had some fun working on some numbers with Builder. But Builder is a Army Corps of Engineers construction engineering research lab product that is really leading the charge in terms of developing defensible predictive models for facility requirements. So that's the credit really goes to a whole raft of researchers over decades of work. But I think jumping to this report, from evaluating how those reports have impacted public policy, I think this one's really set up to be the most productive in terms of influencing changes to policy based on the findings it has in there, and then that culminate in those 5 recommendations.
Excellent. Can you hazard a guess at what might happen, or is it best to leave that alone?
Yeah, well, I mean, so right now, as a member of the National Academies and advancing that, it is with the intention that these recommendations do influence policy. There'll be meetings with members of different groups, GAO, OMB, potentially committees on the Hill. But I think areas that really are kind of like leading indicators. One is the accounting system that governs how all agencies have to account for their funds is effectively broken if you look at it from the perspective of asset-based accounting. It goes into the adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. And the accounting structure is built and refined and very purposefully developed to evaluate the flow of money, to make sure that the dollars being appropriated by Congress are being expended on the authorized use. A totally appropriate requirement, oversight requirement. And the CFO Act is really kind of the enforcing mechanism to make sure that that's all happening. But if you follow that and only follow that perspective, you lose perspective on, well, how much money is really being spent on facility assets? And right now, based on the accounting rules and accounting structure, there's no way to know. Probably the biggest egregious element in that is all personnel costs are lumped into a funding line or a kind of an accounting group, and many contracts are lumped into an accounting group. Both of those are providing support for facilities, but if you look at the accounting structure, you can't use the accounting numbers to figure out how much money you're actually spending on facilities. So agencies don't know what the total ownership costs are facilities or don't use them in decision making. So the hope from this report is that's one area that will get some attention. And there's a number of solutions that I think are viable and can work. The other one is connecting and reconciling budget, strategy, and programs. There's three things. There's a lot of requirements in OMB policy that details what needs to be done. It's all actually very good, but there's never really a final evaluation, like an accountable executive has to sign off on the fact, if you give me this much money to achieve these objectives, the strategy, and I have these resources, these programs to do that, this is what you get. So basically we get kind of the challenge of, well, next year we'll do better next time. And we get things like deferred maintenance backlog and excess facility portfolios just growing without really any accountability. So the hope is the strategies, also it does, the recommendations show that's a critical area that deserves more attention. And the hope is that it does get the attention and solutions get developed on bringing that final reconciliation all together, which, by the way, if you follow ISO 55000, that is done by the standards in the form of the SAMP, the Strategic Asset Management Plan. So that's why ISO 55000 is important to provide the integrity of strategies to renew federal facilities.
That's excellent work and excellent presentation of a very dense subject. So thank you for that. And while that is theoretically based, there was another report, and you were involved with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Can you say how that provides a boots on the ground understanding of why these policies and potential legislation are important?
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was initiated as an act of Congress. It's related to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. Has two large campuses, one in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and one in Boulder. They have some other assets in other locations, but that's really where most of their facilities are concentrated. And the challenge that was identified was effectively how to renew those facilities in support of that agency's mission, which is broad and honestly affects every American and many members of this world on the products that they do, anything from, 5G frequency management to nanotechnology to, making sure that baby food is safe. Semiconductor industry. It's just amazing what they do. But what was recognized, and it was well recognized, that facilities were directly impacting the productivity of NIST mission, the ability to do research, to do standards and testing of things. And it was kind of like the tragedy of the commons. Everybody could recognize it, but nobody could really figure out, like, what does it really take to do this? And some years NIST would get some funding to help out, but then the next year, 2 years later, they're right back in kind of like rubbing two nickels together trying to make things happen. So this report took a perspective. It was part of the national academies. Panel of experts came together, evaluated the problem, took a look at it. What the report found is that due to chronic underfunding of facilities at NIST, which would be also representative of just about any federal agency you can name, that there was a direct 20% impact on its productivity. So there's obvious impacts. The challenge, and I think kind of what gets blurred is like, well, it's just the cost of doing business type of thing. Sometimes facilities are viewed as an overhead account and it just costs money. So the work's getting done, but it's impacting their mission. So this report was able to identify that clean linkage, estimate the impact. What's kind of interesting about the report, the PRV, the plant replacement value of the NIST campuses and facilities, is estimated at $3 billion. If you apply the 2 to 4% PRV, you get a number. This report recommends $6 billion of investment to be made on NIST facilities over the next 10 years, which is a substantial investment, and it almost entirely ignores a 2 to 4% of PRV. And here's why, and it's really an asset management proposition, not a maintenance problem to solve. The thing is due to lack of investments in NIST facilities, the productivity and the capabilities of NIST have been degraded, and that's known and well recognized. What isn't recognized is the opportunity cost or the lost competitive capabilities of NIST to make America safer, more secure, and more prosperous. Its mission is really about commerce and quality of life. So because NIST was able to not do some of that stuff, we lost out on some of that opportunity. And on a national scale, when it comes to like semiconductors and the ability to simply like with the CHIPS Act and stuff like that, onshore that capability is dependent on NIST facilities and NIST capabilities to bring that research, bring that leading edge capability back. So those are impacts that aren't necessarily on a balance sheet, but also change the value proposition of how you look at investment. So the 2 to 4% is good to keep things moving along, but it misses the broader asset management implication of, if America is not investing in those facilities, somebody else is. And because of that, that affects America's ability to be competitive in a commerce standpoint, but also in our quality of life and the contributions that we can make to really kind of the world public at large. So it was it's telling, but it also kind of tells the story of a real example of what happens when we don't continually renew our facility portfolio.
So Art Curlin brought up a question that I was going to ask, and why I asked you about NIST, because it's not just the facilities, it's the equipment in the facilies, if I understand properly. But let's address that after Nick does a formal close. There's been an increase of people who are attending as this has gone on. That does not happen often. So I'm sure there's interest in continuing the discussion.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jack, for the lively discussion, and it's not over yet. And thank you all who've stuck around thus far for participating in that discussion, and hope you can stick around a little longer. We want to thank our ALN Platinum organizational member, Onuma System. Again, follow up for more information on our YouTube channel or our website for information about the recent BIM storm activities and upcoming ones. We haven't planned yet, but will be in the works for sure. ALN patron members as well, we want to thank, and all our organizational members, especially Asset Management Partnership for Jack Dempsey's participation today and on BIM storm activities and many more programs. Please reach out if you think your organization could be a good fit to work with the ALN. We would love to talk about what we can do together. So thank you everyone for being here, and now back to Jack and Mike.
All right, so now we got all that formal stuff. We can take the ties off, we can relax. If anybody out there would like to become a panelist, please put it in the chat. We'll turn you into a panelist. You can talk directly with Jack. If you're from the GAO and want to make comments, that would be appreciated. But anybody who wants to talk. So let's get to what Art was saying and why I mentioned the NIST report. I think an important part of that is it is understood that for a science and technology facility, that the equipment inside of it is critical, and it's inclusive. When you're talking about a need for renewing the facility, means you need to renew the equipment in it. Is there anything you can say more specifically about what the report says in that regard?
I mean, Art's absolutely right. And as a leader in asset management in his own right, knows well. And I really applaud the things and the leadership that Art has brought to this table in this area. Art's exactly right. If you get to the ISO 55000 standard, it was initially kind of born from a physical asset perspective, kind of like a facility, major equipment kind of perspective. And it does to this day still have some of that bias, although there is an update going on that's kind of moving that bias. But the noun, is the asset. And the asset is a thing that adds or perceived to add value to the organization. And that is in the form of facilities. So this report, the problem statement or the charter was to focus on federal facilities. But in no way do I think the recommendations or the concepts presented there are limited to that. I think they apply equally well to physical assets, likewise to technology assets, data as an asset, and intangibles. In your opening comments, Mike, things like brand, reputation, and elements about sexual harassment in the workplace are all factors that are relevant to an asset management conversation.
Excellent. So then we've been having an interesting side discussion on engineering and financing and combining these. How does the report or the strategies report and asset management help promote that?
So strategy looks at, you're looking at physical assets, and a lot of times I'm a civil engineer by training. So, you kind of go with your strengths and the way that you think about things. But asset management really breaks it down to investment decision making. You could say risk informed resource and investment decision making. So asset management in a unfettered way, tries to get everything kind of it's not entirely, but the decision-making process involves something of an objective criteria. Monetization of activities is a well-recognized method to do that. That's universal, cuts across, people to buying things to leasing and all that kind of stuff. So asset management at its core is really about making risk-informed investment and resourcing decisions. So the relationship of the financial criteria in terms of how a federal agency such as like PPBE, planning, program, budgeting, and execution, is a kind of well-formed methodology of how federal agencies manage their financial resources. and asset management are, I think, even closer than two sides of the same coin. They're really intertwined with one another. And you will not have an effective asset management system that's not integrated with the financial decision-making of an organization.
Thank you. And then Russell Weniger from the U.S. Air Force mentions contracts for services as an asset. Can you talk on that for a bit?
I mean, absolutely. And I think what Russell brings up is a really important point, because when we get into the intangible assets, supply chains, contracts, relationships are assets. There was an interesting conversation I was involved that, we don't measure everything about assets. And I'm challenged to find an example where that's not true. The example brought up some of us are married or have significant others, and we're not measuring that relationship. So it's not an asset, that relationship, so to speak. And I think, no, it is. No, I don't have like a condition index of my my marriage or my relationship with my wife.
Jack.
But what it is, but I'm constantly looking for feedback and trying to make sure that I'm in alignment, or we're in alignment on certain things. So the contracts is a method by which, in Russell's case, the Air Force is establishing a relationship with industry to provide a service to support the Air Force achieving what it needs to do. So it's not just the transaction of, some base operating service. It's really the relationship with industry and the ability for that industry to understand what the Air Force needs so the Air Force can get its job done. So those types of relationships, the clarity, the transparency, the integrity, and the effectiveness of those contracts is an asset, and an asset that can be managed in terms of an asset management system.
Excellent. Thank you. So Jack Kelly builds further on Art's comments and says that the U.S. government actually separates real property and personal property as if they're not interdependent, and puts more emphasis on real property. Now, you were integral in this recent ALN storm and saw how much we're working to show that from the pre-planning, you can have your equipment assets, your personal property assets, and your facility assets working hand in glove from the beginning. Can you talk about what you observed there, and what a policy, maybe strategies can impact the thinking there with some type of policies that unites these assets?
Yeah, the sessions that we had finishing up yesterday on the BIM storms and the stuff that Camone's doing in terms of virtualization and bringing lots of really cool stuff together in the Chat GPT elements. What was highlighted, and I think was really evident in the conversations over those sessions, was it's really a lot about communications, the ability to share and understand, this is important to me, or this is what it's going to take, this is how it's going. And if that information is happening and it's enabled by technology and people are trusting it, so it's not just we have good data and information, people have to get comfortable with this. So it does take a little bit of time to evolve, but the emphasis is towards better communications will lead to better outcomes. So I think that's kind of a capture there. Jack's point in terms of, the federal government has been in the practice of, separating things into manageable groups. As an engineer, that's how I learned how to solve problems. Engineers break down things into little pieces. They solve the little pieces, they assemble them into an answer, and they pull it all together. Now, eventually that might mean something, but I think what we're recognizing in macro terms is there's efforts to better communicate across these stovepipes and to better understand the cause and effect of decisions that get made in one side or the other. So I think it is moving in this direction. I can speak with some authority in terms of the real property policies that the federal government's doing, but I recognize and see similar things happening on the personal property and beyond, IT and other types of assets, is to try to break down those barriers of communication and help organizations kind of pull it together. And I mean, a little bit of a plug, one of my recent newsletters on limitless asset management is on that exact topic. It's through methods of how we learn how to communicate with one another, management systems, using terminology and common concepts will help us work together. And I think in time, and I would think Jack would agree with this, in time, as we develop those skills as an organization, we're going to collectively better able to communicate, manage risk, and make better decisions.
Well, great. Thank you. We could go on for a long time, but I do want to advocate people to look at your newsletter. I have been really impressed and educated. Things that you're saying about management systems in general and how ISO has them designed to be worked together. I don't think people understand that enough. And I thank you for those missives that you're pumping out on a weekly basis. Now I understand how hard that is. So thank you for those efforts. And thank you for your contributions as an ALN board member, as an ALN senior fellow, and now as an ALN organizational member. We really appreciate what you do, and I'm happy to have a platform for you to get the word out to the growing audience that showed up today. So thank you to all of the audience. We appreciate your attendance. Jack, thank you so much. Nick, thank you. And next week, intangible assets of addressing sexual harassment, sexual abuse. And then 2 weeks from now, cities and places and how your municipality. So you might be involved in the federal government, but everybody lives in a city. So please pay attention to what we're doing there, because we need to bring this from the federal government into the cities, into your city. So if you pay attention to this upcoming program, you'll see how you can get involved on that level. And appreciate everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Thank you.